Within my case study, my athlete is competing in his first boxing bout within 12 weeks' time, and I'll be working closely with this athlete to improve his overall performance. With this, I must first complete a needs analysis to fully understand what is needed in this sport to ultimately become proficient and excel in sport. Within this sport, there are various vital requirements such as muscular endurance, strength, explosive power, joint stability and mobility, speed, and a need for a proficient anaerobic and aerobic capability. Working with this athlete, we've both established he already has a fairly solid foundation of strength gained over the years from various resistive training methods. Although we'll be working on areas such as muscular endurance, within this particular session we aimed at working around building power and strength with aspects of speed during the lifts, which will involve improvements in maximal strength and power, rate of force development, and overall joint stability and mobility within these exercises. Within boxing, it is understood that to produce greater power, it's often cued that they must twist their hips or put their body behind the punch. An example of this is a study by Filmonov in 1985, who found that the higher the level of the athlete, the more they use their legs to generate the power in a punch, which is also extremely similar to a shot put throw. This highlights a huge importance in training the lower body, even in boxing, where it involves primarily punching. For example, if you use a breakdown left cross punch, the initial movement will begin with the drive up from the rear leg, with the most powerful drive of the movement being a rear leg hip extension from the glute max. The initial driving mechanism of the punch is also aided by ankle plantar flexion of the same leg by pushing the foot firmly into the ground. This is seen to be the most critical part in the power development in the punch, as the leg must exert a huge amount of force into the ground to overcome that inertia created and then allow the force to be smoothly distributed up the kinetic chain, eventually resulting in a more powerful punch. Boxers can also tend to spend relatively long periods of time in guarded positions, which demands of a rounded of the shoulders and the upper back. This posture combined with high volumes of punching from this position can create overactive shoulders and trapezius muscle. If this arises, further issues can result, including rotator cuff pathologies and lower back problems. To combat this, full thoracic mobility drills, as well as shoulder mobility and appropriate exercise to strengthen the thoracic spine and shoulders should be included in any strength training program for a boxer. Boxers can develop shortened hip muscles, in particular the hip flexors, which can possibly result in lower back issues and potential inhibition of gluteal function, whether that be activation and or strength expressions. As mentioned earlier, the hip and trunk rotational movements contribute significantly to punch and torque, and therefore this area needs specific movement and strengthening attention. Boxing is a short duration, high intensity sport with mixed duration periods of lower intensity. The higher intensity to rest ratio has been estimated 3:1, as measured by a study by Kraemer in 2006, but it's obviously dependent on the bout format. Boxers also require higher levels of gluteal strength to facilitate a forceful hip extension and rotation. Increasing maximal strength have been shown to provide a platform on which a greater power can be developed. Gluteal strength can be developed with exercises such as Olympic lifts, squats, weighted squat jumps, and where an emphasis is on that hip extension, particularly beneficial when triple extension within a movement pattern such as Olympic lifts are present, which can potentially carry a crossover into the sport. Multiple planes of movement should be utilised to further improve force production in the upper body and trunk. Attention also needs to be carefully managed as hypertrophy might occur, which may not be desirable in terms of making weight. Importantly, the ability to generate high levels of punching force in a rapid period of time is extremely important. This requires speed, power in combinations delivered by utilising the phosphate system. Certain tests have been formulated in order to measure punching power, such as the shot put test by Obinsky et al. In 2011. This test is regarded as an acceptable assessment of upper body power. Lower body power can also be measured using vertical jump and long horizontal jump tests. I would normally start the warm-up using a method of cardiovascular training to increase the heart rate and increase the body temperature and get the athlete ready and primed for a strength session. Typically, I would like to spend at least 15 to 20 minutes with the athlete during the warm-up and mobility drills. But this cannot always be the case, and more often than not, it's often pad work which is used to warm up the athlete prior to exercise. Here, I have my athlete performing a 5 to 10 minute warm-up using the assault bike at a steady pace. I've chosen this because I believe this can be a sport specific in terms of how it displays similar movement patterns as to what an athlete would execute during a bout. The first mobility drill demonstrated here is focusing primarily on T-spine mobility. Here the athlete is in a solid position on all fours with hands on the shoulders, knees on the hips, and will begin by threading his arm through his body. This is used in boxing because a large primary movement is rotation of the trunk, which requires optimal T-spine rotational mobility, which will translate into throwing a more powerful punch and promoting an optimal posture for progressing to Olympic lifts and specific boxing training. This is also relevant to boxing due to the high rotational aspects of the sport. Peak rotational forces are apparent during the sport, and optimal T-spine mobility is vital in ensuring that the kinetic chain can transfer these forces smoothly and effectively. Here the athlete is performing a pec minor mobilisation, where we are aiming to reduce the tightness within this specific muscle. This muscle is the common cause for developing rounded shoulders in this sport, and it is extremely common. Here you can see me coaching specifically where you should be feeling the stretch, and emphasising a greater stretch by leaning into it. This is very similar to a doorway stretch. Here the athlete will perform shoulder dislocations. The aim of this drill is to improve overall shoulder health and mobility by placing the shoulder joint and capsule itself through its full range of motion. This can also be adapted by changing a grip from an overhand to an underhand grip to create a further emphasis on external rotation of the shoulder. Here the next drill is what I call around the world using a 5 kg plate or kettlebell, obviously dependent on the athlete, but 5 kilos here is perfect. Here he's just rotating clockwise for a series of repetitions, typically prescribed between 10 to 15 reps, and then it'll be reversed anti-clockwise for the same number of repetitions. Here you want to engage and activate those muscles surrounding the scapula and shoulder, while activating those stabilising muscles, such as the teres major, rhomboids, serratus anterior, traps, and the vata scap. This is due to the athlete throwing a punch at high speeds. The joint is undergoing high levels of forces, which needs to be controlled by the stabilising muscles around the shoulder girdle. The next drill outlined is an overhead lunge. Typically I'd use a standard lunge, but this individual I really wanted to emphasise and promote an optimal posture, thus using a PVC pipe or a barbell, which encourages further T-spine extension. This can also be used as a test look for the amount of mobility the athlete has, or it can be changed to an overhead squat using a barbell or PVC pipe. This exercise here not only works for lower limbs such as the glutes, hamstrings and quads, but also it encourages upper body mobility in areas such as the shoulders, lats, T-spine and also lumbar mobility. The final drill that I incorporate into this session is what I call a fire hydrant. This has been chosen because many boxers have underdeveloped gluteal strength due to time being spent in the boxing stance and large endurance type running volumes. Glute strength and activation is an extremely important contributor to forceful hip extension and rotation, which is needed during running, jumping and punching. Glute strength, specifically the glute max, can have a potential to be one of the largest contributors to hip extension and rotation, and with correct engagement and activation, this can lead to improving punching force. Here you can find me closely working with the athlete, looking at certain issues and segments within the lift that I believe need to be improved to improve his further competency within this lift. Within this movement, I believe he's having trouble with the pulling motion, getting the weight from his hips all the way up into the top of his chest. Getting a closer view of the athlete, I've noticed that he keeps rounding his shoulders during the lift. This is something which I believe is a mobility issue, possibly pec minor, which can be improved through some simple mobility exercises before the program, as example as I highlighted before. As you can see in this slide, I've highlighted some main coaching points specifically for this athlete. I believe if the athlete improves on these specific points, then he'll further increase his competency within this lift. But within the session, I don't want to throw too many cues at the athlete because this can cause further confusion, so sticking to simple issues such as the pulling, and then increase the cues further on in the program. Here I've also highlighted the force velocity curve. As an example, I'll be working to increase peak power, which will be aiming between 30 and 80% of his 1 rep maximum, as you can see in the diagram outlined. As the athlete is lifting at 35% of his 1 rep maximum in aim to develop that peak power and that rate of force development, here you'll be doing 4 sets of 5 repetitions. As the athlete is actually becoming proficient and slowly learning the technique of this specific lift, I've also cued the athlete to lift with maximal intent, because without maximal intent or velocity, maximal power at any load is not possible. The goal as a coach here is to predominantly create power at all points along the force velocity curve throughout the coming weeks and within the training program. But within this session, we're not only aiming to improve technique competency for the athlete, we're also trying to improve their peak power performance. It's also extremely important for the coach to understand that these adaptations are ultimately determined by the effort exerted by the athlete within training. Here the athlete is completing a bench press exercise. Here he is lifting to an optimal load, which will be performed with the intent to execute quickly and explosively. Here the athlete is working to improve his peak power and strength. Throughout this exercise, I was cueing the athlete to drive the bar up as quickly as possible to improve that initial peak power and hopefully have a crossover effect in the sport by improving the power output in the transverse plane. Throughout the programme, I will not only be having my athlete perform this exercise using various rep ranges, specifically for peak power, but I will also ensure that training takes place in all stages of the force velocity curve. Here you can see me demonstrating the little cues which I noticed, such as the bar path from the ending to the start position. Here I demonstrated this path, how I'd like it to be executed to limit the stresses applied for that shoulder joint and hopefully reduce any risk of injuries from occurring. Immediately after this demonstration, I noticed his technique was improved, so I took a step back, allowed him to apply my advice, and the result was an improved lifting technique. Here the athlete are now performing some back squats, which primarily conditions the quads and the glutes, which are two of the biggest muscle groups of our body. The back squat secondarily requires the hamstring to provide explosive power on the way back up from the hole in the squat, which can potentially carry a crossover into the boxing, which can possibly improve the boxer's power development and potential rate of force development. With not all athletes having the coordination or skills to perform an Olympic lift, it's forced the coach to look elsewhere for an explosive type of exercise, which involves triple extension. Now I have the confidence an athlete can squat with a relatively good technique, with some load that can now progress onto an exercise such as jump squats in the next session. But before that, I must look at the athlete's landing ability. This type of exercise then will increase explosive power of the hip, knee and ankle extensors, also develop angular velocity of the hip, knee and ankle, furthermore improving the rate of force development, which is the whole aim of this exercise. Here I was walking around the athlete while I was performing the squat, looking for certain angles from the forward, behind and the side to check on form and technique. Here I noticed there was a slight butt wink at the bottom of the squat, which can be improved by doing some mobility exercise with hamstrings due to tightness, and then ensuring the athlete keeps an upright chest and head held high during the ascent and descent of the movement. As boxing is a very physiologically taxing sport, boxers tend to typically develop the anterior chain more than the posterior chain, just due to the nature of the sport. It's extremely important that these muscles within the posterior chain are strengthened so no imbalances and potential injuries are developed over time. This exercise also mimics the movement of throwing a punch and extending the arm out quickly, returning the arms back close to the body and returning to the stance position. There wasn't many cues needed in terms of critiquing his form and his technique, as the athlete has experienced completing this exercise over the years with prior strength training. During this exercise, I ensured that the athlete had the intention to drive the elbows up quickly throughout the concentric phase of this lift. As seen in this clip, I was cueing the athlete to continue to fully retract his scapula throughout the movement, but overall his form and technique is great and I believe not much coaching is required for the movement. Here we're completing 5 sets of 5 with emphasis on maximal intent to explosively drive that weight back up concentrically while aiming to improve maximal strength using loads around 80% of his 1 rep max. Next exercise is a unilateral step up on a 20cm box. As the athlete's performed this movement before, I'm fairly happy with his proficiency in demonstrating optimal technique and form while carrying a load, although I do show him a demonstration anyway just to be safe. I'm walking around the athlete to begin with, just looking at various angles from behind, either side and in front, just looking for the usual problems which tend to pop up, such as a falling chest, which then results in rounding the upper back and shoulders, stepping on the box with the lower leg, taking the majority of the workload rather than the lead leg on the box, and also potential increase in knee valgus, which could be due to a cause of glute med weakness. This exercise is not only excellent in development of unilateral power and strength, but can also be used to increase muscular endurance using the appropriate rep ranges. But this also improves the individual's coordination and proprioception, which are both extremely important skills which can carry over into the sport of boxing. I've chosen this exercise because during the bout, the athlete typically moves in quick short steps in a fairly staggered stance with one leg in front of the other, around shoulder width apart. Developing that burst of speed and power of the planted foot is vital due to its importance in ensuring they are propelled efficiently while also improving the force development right through the kinetic chain correctly. Here we perform 5 sets of 5 with 40% of his 1 RM to improve and develop his peak power and speed strength, while again emphasising that explosiveness with the lead leg. Here an exercise, in my opinion, which is extremely important in the sport of boxing and should be a staple in a boxer's programme, is the use of medicine ball strengthening work. Here the athlete is taking a medicine ball into the beginning phase of throwing a jab, generating that power from a solid base to the core, eventually into the hands, all the way up through the kinetic chain. Here the athlete will toss the ball with maximal effort as they were throwing a punch, ensuring that the muscles, such as the glutes, abdominals, obliques, hip flexors and back extensors are all working together in unison to transfer force between the upper body and the lower body. The aim is to improve and increase strength, speed and power, a few of many main components within the sport of boxing. I want to ensure that my athlete is strengthening and improving his power in both the transverse and sagittal planes of motion, again focusing on the far end of the force velocity curve. I can also eventually progress this exercise to allow the athlete to catch the incoming toss with force in both transverse and sagittal planes to increase the athlete's ability to absorb incoming external forces. Here, as you can see, I'm coaching and just observing the first few steps without any coaching specifically, gauging an idea of areas of improvement, and then demonstrate where I believe he needs a slight improvement, in which in this case he wasn't fully extended his arms on the release phase of a rotational medicine ball toss. And I believe this is weight and creating momentum and the power of the swing generated from the lower body. In order to tell him to control his breathing and exhale on the release of the ball while emphasising that rotational movement of the trunk to create that speed and power, and then release in a fully extended position with the core tight and engaged along with the glutes. After these simple cues, I believe it improved his overall technique in this exercise, and as the weeks progress I aim to include more cues and aim to get that perfect technique.